So Tim, what would you say are the burning issues at the moment within the food world?
The agenda ought to be about making the food system more sustainable. That means consumers changing what we eat. It means supply chains changing. It means wising ourselves up to a more complex world and beginning to develop criteria for how to deal with that. That's what we ought to be doing. I summarize that as aiming for sustainable diets from sustainable food systems. And this is a world in which both production and consumption are going to have to change. We've done things like turn animals into our competitors. It's extraordinary. Worldwide, about 40 to 50% of grain, it varies by continent, that is grown is fed to animals. And those animals are now contributors to heart disease. They're our competitors for water use, land use, and so on. So somehow we've got to shift away from a diet which is heavily focused on meat and dairy. Even in vegetarian India, it's now the biggest dairy herd on the planet. We've got to alter things. And that takes us into tricky territory. No wonder the politicians are frightened of doing it, but the food industry knows that it's got to do this. And academics and scientists, academics like me, are pushing very hard for that.
Do you see a cultural change, though, within the next generation to accept that? They're more open-minded to say, yes, we will change our diet because we understand the big picture?
I think it's very interesting to look at food through the lens of age, generations, age groups, cohorts. That's one dimension, definitely. Younger people are more aware of animal welfare alongside environment, alongside health. But actually on health, they're not very good. They think, well, we'll just eat anything and drink soft drinks and eat burgers morning.
Which is the way they've been brought up.
That's the way they've been brought up, but it's also they're not thinking long-term consequences. But there's another dimension, which is rich world, poor world. There are huge differences. We say, in Britain, in the rich world, let's eat less meat and dairy. That's what the data says. But actually, in very poor countries, they need to eat more of almost everything because they're under-consuming. But then even that world has got more messy because in sub-Saharan Africa, there's obesity, 5%, 10% in some areas. So it's a tricky, more complicated world. And that's why the politicians and policymakers and also companies don't quite know what the direction of travel is. And people like me have been arguing we need a new framework. The post-Second World War settlement was very good to get us where we've got to, but now we know the harm it's done. We now need a new 21st century settlement. And I call that sustainable dietary guidelines from Sustainable Development Goals, or to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG squared strategy. And I think that is going to be the new framework. We've got the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. You can't deliver those unless you deal with food, but what we're not doing is addressing consumers. The problem is consumption.
I understand the SDG squared strategy features in your new book that's coming out.
Yes, a colleague, Pamela Mason, a nutritionist, and I have spent 2 years basically reviewing all the data across this very complex terrain. And we've summarized it in a book called Sustainable Diets, Why Else and What Else Could It Be Called, to try and say, look, we don't need to drown in this complexity. We can reduce it to 6 headings: quality, environment, health, social and cultural factors, economics, real economics, not just cheapness, but real cost accounting, and good governance. And those 6 headings, business can use and consumers can use, but above all, governments can use. And we think that's a framework which can be applied.
Thank you very much.